Hello, welcome to Sports Psychology Revision Screencast. Today's focus is going to be on confidence and self-efficacy in sports performance. So what I'm going to do then, we need to have an understanding of two key definitions: sports confidence, self-efficacy, and then we have this kind of a quick area here on the impact, being able to analyse the impact of confidence or sports confidence on these three areas. Now, onto that, we have a specific model we have to be able to analyse. So we've got Veely's model of sports confidence, and we have to particularly make sure we can define these four, as these could be asked in direct questions, but obviously we have to know the model as a whole. Now, we'll also do a bit on Bandora's self-efficacy, but we'll do that. I'll show you that specification when we get to it. Okay, so let's have a look then to start with. First definition we need to have then, sports confidence. So sports confidence, self-belief an individual has in their ability to be successful in sport. Okay, so belief an individual has in their ability to be successful in sport. Now, some people have really high sports confidence, other people have really low sports confidence. So what we have to do then is, once we've got this key definition, the next thing we have to be able to do is we have to be able to analyze the effect of different conditions. So if I have a look on here, this question came up in 2018 A-level psychological factors exam, and it asked this: analyze the impact of sports confidence on participation and performance in physical activity. So when this question came up, I mean, I have to be honest, this has to be one of the easiest questions that you would get with the command word analyze. I mean, all this simply is asking you to do is to say that if you have this belief in your kind of ability to be successful, this will increase your participation, likelihood of participation. If you don't have it, more likely decrease your participation. If you have it, more likely to increase your performance. If you don't have it, I'm sure you can get the idea of this. So what we do now is you are going to get in the question participation, performance, or the other one is self-esteem. So we'll have a look down to here and start to see how we'd answer that. So this is the kind of specification here: sports confidence, performance, participation, and self-esteem. So this was the exam question. This is exactly drawn from the mark scheme. So just see how easy this would be. So performance: if you have high sports confidence, this will lead to high motivation and thus performance. Whereas if you have low sports confidence, this will lead to low motivation, thus performance. Just change that, that's a typo. Okay, so low motivation and performance. On here then, if you go down to here, participation. So if you have high sports confidence, this will lead to increased participation. Okay, and you could add on here, due to this idea of approach behavior. Okay, you approach challenges, you want to take part. On the flip side here, if you have low sports confidence, this will often lead to decreased participation, because often you want to avoid things. So you don't want to participate, you avoid participation. Finally, if you have high sports confidence, obviously, if you have a high sports confidence, this is more likely to lead to high self-esteem, and this is often due to the way that you attribute your success. Okay, so people who have high sports confidence will have high self-esteem because they tend to attribute success to external factors, for example, their ability or how hard they have tried with regard to effort. Low sports confidence, on the flip side, will lead to low self-esteem, and this could be due to the same attributions, but this time for failure. So they would say if they failed, it's all their fault, they've got low ability, therefore it can't change, they don't try very hard. If you go on from that, I suppose you could link it to the next section, which is going to be, you could say that if they are successful when they've got low sports confidence, they will attribute success to external factors, which gives them no personal responsibility. So that's your first section. Very, very easy. You need that definition, and you need to be able to just apply. Okay, give a double application to say, if the if the term is sports confidence, we have to say if it's high levels, it will lead to one effect on performance, participation, and self-esteem. If it is low, it will lead to another effect on performance, participation, self-esteem. It's an extremely simple area there to do. So let's go on then. One people tend to find a little bit more tricky is this idea of Veely's model of sports confidence. Okay, so this is the model. In exam question, you're most likely to actually get this in the paper. 2018 A-level psychological factors paper, there was a question on the multidimensional model of leadership. They gave you the model. Historically, every time there has been a model, a sports confidence or Veely's model question, they have always given you the model in the paper. Therefore, what is it we need to be able to do? Well, first up, I think it's worth just having a look at it. So if you look here, you've got these three things going across the top of the model. Okay, so what it's basically saying is there is an interaction of trait sports confidence, objective sports situation, and competitive orientation. These three will interact to have a knock-on effect on state sports confidence, which will then affect behavioural response, which will then affect subjective outcome, which in turn will either increase or decrease the things we started with at the top here: trait sports confidence, competitive orientation. That is the basic outline of Veely's model of sports confidence. Of course, what we need to be able to do is we need to be able to explain, describe each of these key components. Okay, so that's our focus now. We've got to make sure we can explain them, and we're going to link them to a penalty in football on every section through. And that is what you're going to be looking to do. I mean, I look at this question, this topic area, it's got real potential as a kind of a 10-mark question, just because of the amount of application you can use all the way through. So I think that's something to make sure that we've got. So let's have a look then. First things first, trait sports confidence then. Now we've seen this word trait before, okay? And we use the same key things. Trait, innate. From there, we now have some extra bits we can put on it. So trait sports confidence is basically talking about this innate, stable and enduring confidence in a wide range of situations, consistent across situations. So I'll put in here, innate, predisposition to be confident, but you could also have innate, stable and enduring confidence. I'd probably add that in if I was you. And then, of course, if we link that across in a wide range of situations, so this could be confident in a wide range of sports, or if it was based around football, we could say confident in football and racket sports, or you could say confident in a wide range of situations within football. For example, passing, heading, and shooting. Whichever one you want to do, just make sure you apply it in that way. So that's your first bit. Going on. Objective sports situation then is the actual skill that's going to be undertaken. For example, in this case, we've already said this on the left here, but we've got to make sure in the exam we do this. For example, a penalty. Okay, that's the skill that is going to be observed. From there, we have competitive orientation, and this refers to the degree of competitiveness an individual has. Now, of course, that's a little bit ropey. I can understand you thinking that because competitiveness is quite similar to the word in there, but how we make it different is talk about, okay, if we're talking about penalty in football, how would an individual show their competitiveness? Well, they would probably do it in this way. Some people, if they had high competitive orientation, will volunteer to take a penalty. And I suppose at this point now, it's quite worth us just going through this. We're going to go with this model when we're trying to apply it to the example of a penalty in football. We're just going to give it a kind of a positive slant at the moment. So we're going to give everything, we're going to use a best fit scenario, and we're going to make it positive until we get down to here. So if we go down from here then, these three things, how confident you are, you're an innate predisposition to be confident in a wide range of sports, alongside the skill you're doing, alongside how competitive you are, these three interact. And because we've done these in kind of a best fit scenario, e.g. they're all positive, we're then going to look at how this positive application would affect going down this way. So these three interact, and as a result of the interaction, they will directly impact. Every time you see an arrow going down, that should be your link phrase. So these three directly impact state sports confidence. Now, state sports confidence, we should use the two S's to remember that it is situation-specific confidence. For example, situation-specific confidence when taking a penalty. As we go down, our situation-specific confidence when taking a penalty will have a massive impact on how we respond behaviourally. And what this is talking about is how competently we execute the skill. So, I mean, this is a fancy word. Would you need this exact definition? Probably not. But, you know, you might put the technique or the technical execution if you want to. Or I'd put how competently you execute it. And what does that mean with a penalty? It means how well you strike the ball. Okay, so how well the penalty is struck, or the technique behind the penalty. So you could say, for example, a well-struck penalty. And of course, once you have done this, this will lead to an outcome, okay, which will then lead to a subjective outcome. So what that means is, once you've struck the penalty, if we're keeping in with this example, there'll be an outcome whether you score or miss. Your subjective outcome refers to your perception or interpretation of whether it was successful. Okay, so it's really important we kind of translate this to the subjectivity, the individual who takes the penalty interprets whether they think it's successful or not. And of course, that will come from the outcome, because there's two key things here. The Did you score or did you miss? Okay, if you scored, that's going to mean you have a positive subjective outcome. If you miss, that means you can have a negative subjective outcome. Now, at this point, I think it's really important I make this clear. If you had an exam question that said use an example to describe Veely's model of sports confidence, you'd do exactly what you've just done here. However, there might be a question that asks you to do something a little bit more, a little bit higher level, and it might ask you to analyse the effects of subjective outcomes on confidence and performance using examples. If it did that, this means that we're talking about being able to analyse. As we analysed the impact of sports confidence on our performance in the previous slide, this time we're saying analyse subjective outcome. So if we have to analyse subjective outcome, we've got to talk about it from 2 points of view. Positive, negative, score, miss. And once we've done that, we then have to show a higher level of knowledge, because what we need to do then is to say, right, well, if we have a positive subjective outcome, we've got to talk about the effects it has on trait sports confidence and competitive orientation. So if I went back from here, let's have a look. Let's have a look at the effects of a positive subjective outcome. So you scored the penalty, it's gone in the goal. What are the positive subjective outcome effects on confidence? Well, the first thing is we know that this model measures trait sports confidence, competitive orientation, state sports confidence. So what we have to do is make sure we talk about these now on the knock-on effect. So by scoring a penalty, this will lead to an increase in trait sports confidence. It gives us more confidence in a wider range of sports and situations. It will lead to an increased competitive orientation. So what this means, as you see over here, we continue to volunteer for penalties. Now, as a result of that, and this is the bit that is not on the model, and this is the bit that's going to separate people if you've got the question that just asked you to analyse subjective outcomes. Because once you've scored that penalty, our innate predisposition to be confident in a wide range of situations up, as I've just said, and you know, our competitive, or how competitive we are in the future is going to increase. On top of that, though, we have to remember that this part here, state sports confidence, is also a key part of the model. So as well as having our innate predisposition to be confident in a wide range of situations, it really, I suppose, intensifies our confidence in a specific situation. So this has knock-on effects. It does it in this way. There'll be an increase in state sports confidence, situation-specific confidence, an increase in self-efficacy. These two are the same things, but by different authors or theorists. And then this will lead to an increased approach behaviour, and that kind of links to this competitive orientation there. For example, volunteering or wanting to take the next penalty. I think that's slightly cut off at the bottom there. So if you could get that in, that is how you analyse subjective outcomes positively. Of course, analyse means that we've got to look at it from 2 points of view in the minimum, and in this case, of course, there's only going to be 2 subjective outcomes. So if that's the positive subjective outcome, e.g. you put the penalty in the goal, the next one is a negative subjective outcome, and it follows exactly the same route through. So you look here, effects of a negative subjective outcome. What does this mean there? Well, this means you've missed the penalty. If missed the penalty means it's going to give a kind of negative subjective outcome, which will then decrease your trait sports confidence, competitive orientation. Okay, so you start to reduce your confidence in a wide range of situations. It will reduce your kind of, I suppose, desire to volunteer to take a penalty. And from that, we have a direct link then to our specific types of confidence. So this will lead to a decrease in state sports confidence, which will decrease self-efficacy. Those two, remember, are very similar terms but different authors and theorists. And this will then lead to an increased avoidance behaviour, which means not wanting to take the next penalty. Okay, so to refusing to take, I think that's cut off there. So refusing to take the next penalty because you don't want to miss, your confidence is too low. So that's examples of how that will work for Veely's model of sports confidence. Obviously, there's a number of different questions on this, but as you can see, there's a fair bit to write. So I look at this and think to get it in a 6-mark question will be challenging, although they did it with a multidimensional model of leadership, so I do not see that, I wouldn't say they won't do it. It, of course, gives you lots of kind of potential for a 10-mark question, because you have to explain and interpret the model, but of course, when you get to subjective outcomes, it gives you the opportunity to demonstrate analysis skills. So analysing this idea of subjective outcomes being positive or negative. Now, that's Veely's model of sports confidence. Now what we have to have a look at is, we've just kind of mentioned a second ago, self-efficacy. Now self-efficacy is a slightly different take, and it's from the the theorist Bandura. Okay, so Bandura focuses on situation-specific sports confidence, and it's termed self-efficacy. And basically, the whole premise of this theory is saying if you have low self-efficacy, this could have a real dangerous effect on your confidence, on the way you attribute things, on your performance. Therefore, he proposes 4 key strategies to increase self-efficacy, and they come in a model, and these are them there. So you might now just feel like, oh, I know them anyway. What we have to make sure then is we can translate these into a key descriptor and then apply an example to it to explain how that would lead to an increase in self-efficacy. So these are the 4 in a model. In the exam, I mean, if you've got it here, so the definition of self-efficacy, situation-specific form of confidence. So these are our 4 strategies that Bandura proposes. If you put these strategies in place, you can raise situation-specific confidence. So say, for example, you're looking at a striker in football who started missing penalties, as we use that for Veely's model of sports confidence. What is performance accomplishments? Well, this is the key thing here. Performance accomplishments is somebody reminding the performer of previous success. So, for example, a striker who's missed penalties. Okay, this would involve a coach maybe showing a striker a video of previous successful penalties. So we've got to describe it using that, and then we've got to example it using that. The second strategy is this idea of vicarious experiences. Okay, this is used in life all the time. So basically this involves seeing someone or watching someone of a similar ability being successful. For example, watching a teammate of the same ability of you scoring a penalty. That will increase your efficacy expectations, which will increase your performance. Verbal persuasion then. Now, verbal persuasion can come from 2 forms. It can either be, positive self-talk, easy you do it to yourself, or it can be from a coach giving positive feedback. So let's go with this. Okay, so this is the advantage. If, for example, a football player is missing penalties, a coach giving positive feedback, okay, a significant other giving positive feedback can really help raise our efficacy expectations and performance. For example, coach praising a performer for scoring a penalty. Okay, so that could be an example there. Finally, and this is one students tend to struggle on the most, emotional arousal. What does this mean? I think it's understanding that the emotional aspect of arousal is understanding that having a high arousal is normal when you're in a pressure situation, and therefore understanding that high arousal can lead to high performance. And that is the key thing here. So a player scoring a penalty under pressure, under high arousal. So what it's saying is having high arousal but still scoring the penalty. And they are the kind of 4 strategies you need to know. Really important strategies to change behaviour, and in particular changing sport-specific confidence or situation-specific confidence. Okay, right. Quick look on here then. Can I ask you to just get yourself sorted, get ready to pause this, have a look at the questions on here, see how you feel with them, and I will pause it now. You pause it now. Okay. So have a quick look at that, see how you feel with those. Hopefully let's just give you a little check to see how you feel with regard to understanding that. It's a good little variation between Veely and Bandura. I didn't put anything on the impact of sports confidence on performance, participation and esteem. I felt that was relatively straightforward, so I've just put these as little checkers on here. Okay, right, let's have some exam questions then. So first things first, when you get your synoptic question, it has to link from skill acquisition and sports psychology. Therefore, certain things that might link could be, this kind of idea of sports confidence, Veely's model, or self-efficacy linking to feedback and guidance. So, for example, if you look at the 10-mark question screencast, you can have a look at those and see if that makes sense. For example, Veely's model lends itself quite nicely to positive and negative feedback, a little evaluation of those. Self-efficacy could link quite nicely to guidance. So there are things that you can have a look at, of course. Feedback and guidance are extremely kind of useful for 10-mark questions because both of these have evaluators to command word within the specification. So if we have a look over then, I've just put here an example of a potential part 1 for the 10-mark question. I must make this very clear. I've put this red circle around this because 1, it wouldn't have both Veely's model and self-efficacy in the same question. This is old specification. Secondly, it would not be 20. So I've looked at the top bit, I've highlighted the bit that would be relevant. So using one example from sport, explain Veely's model of sports confidence. So you would be required to do that. I suppose all part one could have been described the methods might be used to raise self-efficacy. Either of these would be a part one link to something like feedback or guidance in part two. Now I thought it might be quite helpful for you to have a look then. If you did get this as a 10, what would the mark scheme look like? So this will be a mark scheme. This is the mark scheme from the old specification, but still exactly the same as what it will be now. So this shows you how you would work through those keys. So majority of the stuff that I've used is linked to this. So if you want to pause it now and have a look, that's absolutely fine. What I'm going to do now is go on to some specific exam questions. So this is the one I was talking about. Now, when this question came up, this was an old specification. So it asks you to, using Veely's model of sports confidence and sporting examples, analyse the impact of subjective outcomes on sports confidence. And what I wanted you to just see here is that when this question comes up, it does not require all of Veely's model to be described. The key content qualifier here, yes, it's Veely's model, but it asks you specifically to analyse the impact of subjective outcomes. So what I wanted you to do here is, if you got this question, it's really important you understand your exam technique for it. So what I've done here, because it asked about subjective outcome, make sure you define subjective outcome, link it to kind of a penalty in football, and then in order to cover all bases, you would then start your analysis process. So a positive subjective outcome will be your point here, and once you get that, for example scoring a penalty, then what you'd be looking to do, if this was a 6-mark question, is then talk about the key things here. So increase trait sports confidence, and I thought here, because the model talks about trait sports confidence in the specification, it'd probably be a good idea just to define trait sports confidence and competitive orientation, and then maybe state sports confidence, because these are specification reference, but all you're doing here is just saying that if you have a positive subjective outcome, this increases, therefore this increases. Whereas, however, because we're analysing a negative subjective outcome, for example missing a penalty, would lead to 1, 2, 3, and all of the negative application to those. Now if we move on, self-efficacy then. So if I just got you to have a look at this one, so question here, self-efficacy can arise from 4 sources, modelled again, using examples from sport, explain how each source can influence a performance. So you must make sure you can explain them, give an example for each, and if you did that effectively, that will give you the 6 marks. So first things first then, pause now, maybe have a go at doing this question. Okay, so I'll let you have a look at the mark scheme here. As you can see, all of this stuff is on there. So I'll let you have a read through that. Next one. Okay, so this was the one we looked at earlier. So this would be a good one to practice because I didn't put it in the kind of recall quiz. So let's have a look at this. Define sports confidence, analyse the impact of sports confidence on participation and performance in physical activity in sport. Pause it now. Have a go at doing that. And as you can see, very, very, very simple here with regard to that question. Okay, thank you very much.